Okay.
which is
No.
right about now. So this is Jim Hamilton and Keita Spock.
That
Close,
works.
close enough.
Close enough.
We've been doing this call for actually a year. We started with email and we had some people on and we went to Skype and we moved around and now we're doing live video to, if nothing else, to practice being live and using cameras. And this is called Resonance Matters. Keita's a publicist in, why don't you introduce yourself just a tiny bit real quick?
Yeah. Well, I run my own company, KS Communications, and I'm a publicist and writer and happiness expert, and am fully engaged in pursuing happiness research, and along with that, having a little fun with it. And by way of that, I mean the Happiness Road Tour, which I've created and is due to debut in New York City this fall. And that basically is a lineup of happiness experts coupled with good entertainment meant to inspire, engage, and connect those people who feel they need or are longing for something more than what they presently have. And that could be finding satisfaction, not only within themselves, but by giving to others. And that's basically what the Happiness Road Tour is proposing to do for the community.
I was remarking before we started that you're looking for somebody, I think, to run this thing nationally. Of course, it's your project and there's so many things going on. And when you bring somebody in on the ground to run this on a day-to-day basis and oversee all these different events, that the people that are attracted to this, and you do it all on the phone so far, but the people physically attracted to this and showing up, I would think it'd be quite a rewarding experience for all involved.
Absolutely, because first of all, being attracted to it is what this show is all about. There's a resonance or a synergy or an emotion or a feeling or a knowing that perhaps this might be an initiative or project that you should investigate. And that's the nature of our human journey, investigating, feeling curious, and kind of people we can be.
Trying to be the best kind of people we could be, I would say so.
Yeah.
So my company is Core Resonance, and my work, I originally started out as visionarieslab.com. My first book, Visionaries Thrive in All Times, and I was just expressing to somebody an hour ago what my work's about, which is an understanding of law of attraction, which a long time ago, law of attraction was called cause and effect. Of course, it still is, but it's the part that resistance plays in our reality creating is where you might say a component of my research is, because resistance keeps us from the order that otherwise everything on and off this planet shares. Nature is a perfect example of complete order. The solar system is complete order. In other words, the planets keep spinning around each other and around the sun, and there's a scale of order that there's no shortage of except within humanity. And if you look at humanity, you'll find a lot of resistance. And in that resistance, we get out of sync with this bigger picture. So that's kind of the essence of what my work's about. What I wanted, we were talking before we started recording, and what I wanted to mention, I did send you something, and maybe we can get into that right this second. I forget what it was, even if you just mentioned it. What was that?
It was and people will be quite curious about this one, skin orgasms.
Oh, that's right, skin orgasm, exactly. But so first, all right. So first, I had talked with a client, and so in our conversation, we were talking about, the part that letting go plays in our reality creating, and how doors, especially if we allow, in other words, everything continues to unfold, especially if we let it, and everything continues to have new doors available to us, I suppose, unless we shut down and say, nope, I ain't taking it anymore, or whatever. But the point I want to make is, I was talking, well, I wake up in the morning and I make notes when I wake up. I wake up with stuff. And this might have been in the middle of the night, but I was talking about a client. I expressed this idea to her yet. But she is the center of her world. And what I see her trying to do very often is try to get somewhere, try to meet somebody, try to achieve something. And she's driven to kind of thinking that what she wants is out there somewhere. And the analogy that I am hoping to express to her at some point is the idea that she is the center, and what happens is everything streams by. And most of it, you let it go. If you meet somebody and they're kind of about resistance and they're kind of negative and this and that, you let them go. They just stream on by. And there's so many things, especially as we learn how to stand still, if you will. It's not exactly, but it's like we're like the pole in the center, and things are streaming by both sides of us. And what we can do is collect just what we want of what's streaming by. And at the same time, even what we want, there comes a point where we let it go and it streams on by, and we continue to refine this process of attaching or meshing with things that are a match in this ever flowing stream of ideas and thoughts and people and events and adventures and experiences and on and on. And the better we get at letting things go and being even more selective, first off, there's always more new coming. And that's where the conversation started before we started recording. And I think the idea of understanding that we live in a stream of consciousness that constantly brings things based on law of attraction. And of course, we often attract at a subconscious level. We have hurts and pains that are still kind of predominant, and so we attract that as well. But as we become selective enough to learn how to let things flow on by and just kind of keep the things we want, instead of trying to get there, huge difference. So that's kind of where I wanted to start things off. Maybe we'll get around to skin orgasms before it's over.
Yeah, I think you make a good point to start, Jim, because a lot of us are trained. We're logically trained to move from A to B to C to D to E. There's a convergence factor here where we're taught that progress or process is identified or manifested by moving forwards. So most of us have the arrow pointing, excuse me, ahead of us, and we're going along that arrow or along that road or along that route, looking for or getting to the destination. It's a very linear way of thinking. It's a very one-dimensional way of thinking. And a lot of what both of us are about in terms of letting go and allowing our innate knowing and resonance dictate our path. There's no linear path. A pool, as Jim suggested at the beginning, and it's as if we're in the middle. And if we do make any kind of an action to precipitate a next step, you'll notice that if you're in a pool, it's not a linear line that you draw. You'll actually create a ripple effect so that your sense of moving forward is in fact concentric as a circle. And so your ability to see all around you and experience all around you is precisely what this letting go and being in the center of things is all about, as opposed to literally and figuratively trying to physically move forward from A to B in a linear progression.
It's a really good analogy, the whole idea of a linear progression, because that's the way the mind thinks in generalities, and of course that's the way we're taught. You know, you sit alphabetically, you get A's, B's, C, D, or E, or an F on your grade, and that's all there is to it. Here at Core Resonance, I intentionally don't use any of the scoring that the software provides. I'm interested in how you feel. I'm interested in what you identify, what you learn, the new ahas, and the idea that you know, getting 100% is the answer, and you get the prize because you got 100% on your test. it's a wrong type of thinking because, as some people have said, it's not the destination, it's the journey. And if you're smart, it keeps being a journey, always, and new doors and new doors. And I just think it's an important idea to, and of course, resistance, what is that? It stops the flow. And of course, it tends to stop the flow in something that we're resistant to in the first place, going, oh, look at that. That's unacceptable. And all of a sudden, what's unacceptable becomes, as Abraham would say, the object of your attention. And then you wonder why you've got SHI asterisk in your life. Because we inadvertently focus on what we don't want without an understanding of that. And I think we learn how to flow and recognize that that flow is always there and always will be. For example, the sun always comes up. Always. So, what can you add to that?
There's a very nice description of the sun and the earth, and it's basically talking about the wonderfulness of the sun coming up, and it speaks of the sun and the earth and their particular relationship, and it asks this question: does the earth ever say to the sun, "Hey, you didn't shine bright enough today. You didn't rise early enough today. You didn't set to my standards, and I didn't like the color you were when you were rising this morning, by the way." And in fact, there is never any objection. There is never any sense of dismay, disappointment, rebuke, or rebuttal. The earth, in and of itself, accepts the sun as it is, coming up every day. And I think that the wonder of that is, how can we as human beings have the same kind of wonder and the same kind of, if you want to use the word, compassion in how we react or respond, not only to unusual or new situations and people and experiences, but also to the daily rituals and habits, perhaps, or goings on that go on daily, because those are sometimes the ones that we most underestimate. And the power of these little things, of course, build up to the big things. And I think if we can, in our own way, appreciate those small things that happen every day, like that good cup of coffee, or the fact that it's sunny today and I can walk. Those things then, magnified with that compassion and gratitude, obviously will spill over into the big things. And so again, maybe this is the metaphor we're using tonight, the spilling over, the ripple effect, being in a pool, going with the flow. There's a reason why water is such a magnificent metaphor for all of this, because it is absolutely without resistance. It's not going to fight with a rock if it happens to meet it along its path. It basically just streams around or over, and nothing more is said about it.
Well, since you're using water as an analogy, let me see if I can throw out an idea and not get too complex. I'm on my third physicist now, and so the periodic table of elements, I think that's what it's called. Hydrogen is the first element. Now, an element's not a molecule. It's not made up of two different things. Hydrogen is hydrogen, and on a periodic table, it's one. And the physicists would say that hydrogen is the closest element in the human scale to God. In other words, it's the closest thing to the veil. And so, in other words, the God frequency is most easily, readily experienced in hydrogen. And you take hydrogen and water and put them together, and the way he would say it is oxygen grounds the hydrogen. I don't know if I'm saying that very well. And so water is actually a very excellent medium for talking about the frequency of God, because hydrogen, I think H2O, so there's two atoms of hydrogen and one of oxygen. And from a science perspective, the concept of God and water, they have some similarities. And of course, with all my boat time and my ocean time, and I've met other people who've spent a lot of time on the ocean, there's actually a depth of understanding that they seem to have from a lot of time on the water. I'm not positive a lake would produce the same thing. Of course, there's really big lakes, and maybe so, but I think of the ocean and salt waters, frankly, as being God's country. I've actually called it that, being out in the ocean.
Mhm. That's an interesting comment. I haven't heard that kind of a statement before, but I wonder, being out on the ocean, generally in a more solitary type of state.
Yep.
To me, because I've never really been on the ocean own for any long periods of time, but I almost, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, because of your experience, I liken being adrift in a boat on water without seeing land, similar to being adrift in space.
Somehow, just lately, I might even been in a dream state, I was thinking about the idea how boats float on the surface of water. And it's if you could see land or see through land, like like it was a cutaway, and you could see land and you could see water, and water's not quite as dense as land, and the boats float on it, and the whole thing is kind of surreal in a way. And boats are still, I was looking at a video somewhere, what was it? Had something to do with some really large boats. They were rafted up together because the docks were such that the one boat we tied up to the dock, I'm talking about something 200 feet long. I forget what I was looking at. And another one was tied up to it. They had the bumpers between them, and 3 and 4 deep. And it's still, the water is still so basic. And using the water is still so very basic. Things float. You push them around. Like you can have something extremely heavy, like a big boat, and 3 or 4 people could untie it. They're tied up to each other and push it around and move them around amongst themselves. They do it with fishing boats and stuff like that. They actually walk them around, and they're heavy, but they float in the water and they have no weight. It's a very interesting phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
It's marvelous. And then, of course, at night, you got sky, you got water, and sky's combo.
Yeah. An immediate word that comes to mind is simplicity. And again, in terms of what we talk about, what we find is important for us as people, is living out whatever our journey or our purpose might be. And a lot of that is not highly complicated, in the sense that there isn't a formula or a categorization or some kind of a big mathematical principle. A lot of who we are, I believe, is very simple. And if we, as you noted at the beginning, take a look at nature, which is so elegant and so beautiful and so perfect in its symmetry and simplicity, then there is that sense that, yeah, we can live simply and then create immense things through that simplicity. Of course, I would be, I'm quite a proponent of simplicity, because it is a very strong attribute of overall happiness and well-being. So the aspect that God, if you like, has created in such a way that if you look to the simplicity of an answer, to the simplicity of a solution, to the simplicity of your life, then that, in fact, may be the missing link that you're looking for.
So to take this back to the conversation before we went off to ocean and boats and stuff like that, what you were talking about was, and I kind of wanted to build on, was when we have gratitude, when we appreciate the little things, it's all of the appreciating the little things. First off, law of attraction says what you focus on expands. If you spend your time appreciating what you have, the momentum builds, and so the big things you have are made up of the little things. And when you don't appreciate what you have and you kind of ignore the simple things and the little things, the next thing you know is the big things get big without having been, I don't want to say managed, but without having been managed. Because when something that's big, that's you're not happy about, I promise you it started out little. And as we have that sensitivity to appreciate things when they're small and live in this simple world, this world of appreciation, this world of acknowledgement, even this world of, well, that's resistance, and first off, I have no obligation to go save the day. What I really need to do is go away from what I don't want and put my attention where I do want, which is kind of part of the idea of this pole, or being the center and everything streaming by, and just collecting or just choosing what you want of so very many things. People assume, especially like in family environments, they assume they're obligated to being with nasty people, and so the whole idea becomes, the simpler we can keep it, the more appreciation we can have, and we build on these little things, and then the big things we have become of our making, and we actually have charge over all that, especially once we get it.
Yeah, there is, I think you make a good point, and I think it's, I'd like to further emphasize that whole concept of personal choice. And with personal choice, decisions are made, and then there are consequences to those decisions. And I've become, through the last 2 or 3 years, very respectful of the kind of choices I'm making, because I realize that even a small choice has the repercussion of bringing about something that is far greater that I may not know of or not even be able to imagine. Let's look at an example. Perhaps I've decided, okay, I'm going to take a walk and go for an errand, and I need some milk, so I'm going to head off to the grocery store. In and of itself, that decision is innocuous. It doesn't seem to have any kind of overt importance or significance to my life or to anybody else's. But while I'm walking to the store, there may be someone coming down the street, and being the person I am, I'm likely to smile at them. And they may be someone who needs that smile that day, who needs a form of affirmation, no matter how subtle, and some of you say, oh, this is so silly. Not at all. The act of affirming another human being is good for everyone concerned. And the act of affirming beyond yourself is one of the factors, characteristics of feeling fulfilled and content yourself.
We all want acceptance. We all want to be acknowledged. It doesn't have to be anything more than a smile when you walk by. Instead of being invisible to others, I think it's one of the biggest problems with people on the street people, is that they're not acknowledged. Everybody's afraid of street people because they're going to want something. And tell you a really funny story. One morning I was walking a girlfriend down to her car on Wilshire Boulevard, and had to be out by a certain time in the morning, because that lane became a driving lane instead of a parking lane. And I was helping her to her car, and some guy, now these tall buildings, the tall buildings everywhere, and some guy pops up between the hedge and the building and says, "Good morning." Somebody sleeping there says good morning. I'll never forget that. I mean, he was chipper and being a sweet guy, and said, anyway, appreciation and acknowledgement, and the simplest things.
Yep.
Especially when we're excelling or putting ourselves out, or even more so, being vulnerable and being accepted in our vulnerability. I think that's kind of the next step that comes along with all that.
Yes, in being on this journey and seeking a form of simplicity, perhaps being a little bit more introspective, doing a little bit of self-assessment, all these things come into play. But one of the factors here, as if you've just mentioned, is once you take that step of exploring yourself, that is opening yourself up, delayering, peeling away the onion, if you like, there is a form of nakedness that occurs. There is a form of vulnerability that takes place. Initially, it's with yourself. Oh, am I really thinking this? Or did I really do that? As you go along your self-inventory. As you go along, and I think this happens in that act of becoming and understanding what knowing is all about, vulnerability becomes a very positive thing. It leaves the realm of what's the word for it, of self-consciousness. It leaves the realm of self-consciousness and becomes a conscious attribute. And when vulnerability is a conscious attribute, it is wonderfully disarming and absolutely delightful to the person who's being vulnerable.
Yeah, it's being discovered in sales and on the stage that vulnerability is one of the very best ways to have rapport with your audience. So even like what we're doing, we're both learning how to use the camera. We're both learning how to be on live stuff, which takes a type of vulnerability. And in doing it, we learn how to do it and become comfortable with it, and of course encourage others to do it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's even the whole course of having conversation. Because those of you who may not know, we live in two separate countries. We've met once, literally by happenstance at a type of business conference in San Diego. And it took courage and a bit of again, that word curiosity, to reach out and start emailing and sensing that there was a commonality, not only of purpose, but in thinking. And with that is mutual respect, when there is a commonality in how one is thinking and approaching life. So, as Jim said, a year later, here we are doing what we're doing, and big dose of vulnerability through this whole time. Because what do you talk about week after week? You can't talk just about the weather.
And so in that vulnerability, all kinds of new things open up, and it's just where we started conversation. You know, doors, whatever's going on, doors open up. And so vulnerability is a component of reality creating as it relates to how our journeys run and how things happen. And so I guess mind-driven is the opposite of vulnerability. And frankly, if you want to be vulnerable, the best way to do it is be plugged into the cosmos, so that you're not really just being vulnerable, because you get run over by the first bus. It's not just about being vulnerable. There's a way to do it. I mean, you can just do it, and I'm sure you'll survive that, but it's the transition to vulnerability, which we did over a period of time as well. It didn't just happen. There's trust, there's all kinds of discoveries of commonalities and sharing and whatever. But it unfolds, and I think this concept of vulnerability is a big component of how our possibilities can turn out.
Yeah. Another way to put it, perhaps, is which might be understood even better, is the fact that when one is moving into a different or new direction, one is taking a risk. So the risk taking in all of this is there. It's present. Sometimes we've associated risk taking with a enterprise or a business, and sometimes it's been seen to be negative.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go out. Don't do that because something may happen to you. Better not, because it's dangerous. But it's interesting to live life fully. A form of risk, a form of trying the new and the different, is absolutely part of the package, if you like.
So I'm glad so we're talking about vulnerability, and we're also talking about risk, and they're actually associated with each other and similar, because to be vulnerable is to risk. And then when it's discovered, see, there was a time when all of us were afraid of the dark, afraid of what was under the bed. I'm not exaggerating, but I'm certain that all of us were a little bit afraid of what we didn't know, particularly when we were young. And as we get older, we try to do what we know works. We try to mind our own manners, and we try to stay on the straight and narrow a little bit. I hear these people stay on the straight and narrow. I've never met any of them, but the point is that to get ahead takes risking. And then there becomes the kind of risking that you take. So what's the best kind of risking? Is it, okay, I'm going to go rob a bank? That's a type of risk. Not very smart. But the ultimate kind of risking is learning how to team up with something bigger than yourself so that you can learn how to let go, so that you can become vulnerable. There is an order to all this. When you understand law of attraction, for example, law of attraction is a component of vulnerability. It's in innocence that as you build toward it, as you move away from resistance and into innocence, if you will, that vulnerability kind of really picks up speed and delivers results. Wang, 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 new doors, new doors, new doors. All of a sudden, offered some major project. All of a sudden, something happened. And if the doors weren't to open, it wouldn't happen. And how do the doors open? You're manipulating your way through life, or you're learning how to let go. You're learning how to be vulnerable. You're learning how to risk in a certain manner. And I promise you, that's the secret of life right there.
Yeah. And I think that phrase, the secret of life, we're both familiar, but there is a sense too of the simple and the risk taking that is clothed, if you like, by a belief and a trust in abundance. That innate abundance that is within us, that the risk taking, the vulnerability, the opening of the doors, the letting go, the allowing, all that is predicated on a belief that all will be well, that all will be given, and that there will be plenty for all concerned. When that kind of notion becomes part of your thinking, then your choice, your decision, as we talked about earlier, is not bounded by fear. It is bounded by a form of trust, confidence, and as we move further into all this, love.
So as we initially, when we're young, we're afraid of the dark, we're afraid of the unknown. As we move along and have that certain kind of common sense and that certain kind of sensibility to discover that what is the unknown is the universe unfolding, for which it is nothing but abundance. I mean, you want to talk about God as being the universe unfolding, that's fine, but there is an order that everything shares. There's an underlying abundance. Ask a tree. There's no shortage of anything. And as the humans come to understand that, that's part of that letting go, is letting go to that bigger order. There's a risk in doing that. There's vulnerability in doing that. It's a very, I don't know how we got into this conversation, but it's great.
Yeah. I was thinking of if you ever watch little kids play, or little kids when they're fantasizing and saying that they're now the king of this area, or they're going after a ball and they're saying, I'm in outer space. There is absolute conviction, in that moment. They are exactly that. And so their universe is completely aligned with that of the divine. And that's why one speaks of little children as being innocent, but there is a majesty and the miracle that is life is in kids, because we can almost see it. We're all meant for that. We're all meant to continue living like that. But what happens, of course, whether it's rules or guidance or belief systems that were taught, cultural conditioning, all these kinds of things, that innocence, that absolute confidence, that absolute, why would it ever be another way? It is what it is somewhat lost. And so we, on our journey, are literally working our way back to being childlike, to being innocent, and being absolutely assured that all is well.
So it goes back to the idea of resistance. So when we're young, we're wide open, king of the hill, out in space, making stuff up. And when we get older, we start getting rigid. It's got to be this way. It needs to be that way. This is the way it should look. I wish you would do it my way. Or as my dad used to say, don't do what I do what I tell you. Just to slip that in. And so all of that is rigidity. People say, well, you got to have rigidity. It's how you get things done. Well, I'll tell you, ask a forest. Do you have any idea how much how much life is in 18 inches under the soil? The physicist I work with tells me that a plant at a root structure puts out a signal to bacteria in the ground, and the bacteria actually get the minerals that the plant needs. In other words, I always assumed that a plant absorbs the minerals. What actually happens is the plant puts out a message for what it wants, and all the different kinds of bacteria in the ground, they assimilate the minerals, and when they poop it, when the bacteria poop it out, it's in a form then that the plant can assimilate. That's a whole nother level I didn't know about. There's a kind of order that humanity doesn't understand. We're destroying our planet, and the scale of order around us is incredible if but we could see it. And it's in our rigidity, it's in our resistance, it's in our things need to be this way. And I think the kids have the answer, and the big kids too, speaking about yourself and myself. We're working our way back to what? What's true? What's true is there's abundance everywhere if but you could see it. And it starts with the smallest of things. It starts with blessing the tiniest events in your life, because the alternative to blessing them is resisting them. And if you keep resisting, you'll end up with huge things in front of you at some point, and you'll wonder, now what? And it starts with the smallest. It starts with the smallest impetus of thought and what you choose to do with that, because your realities do come from what you think. Not immediately, like I can't manifest an apple out of thin air in my hand, but I can tell you that the momentum of my thinking, the momentum of blessing each moment, the momentum of allowing, or the appreciation, or even resistance, the momentum of a whole bunch of that is how we end up with what we end up with. And I suppose the game is most of us create our realities of variations of resistance, starting small and working big. And the vulnerability and the risk is to learn how to do it another way, for which some of us are out there on the cutting edge of that and trying to, if nothing else, continue to document the experience and, of course, share it with others.
Yeah, and this is what this conversation is all about. It's literally a virtual exploration. It's an in time happening experience of sharing thoughts that are not scripted. They're not thought out or planned ahead. We don't really have a great idea of where any conversation goes within the 40-45 minutes or so. But that's part of the beauty of where thoughts go, because each of us is each other's support, but also stimulus in terms of, let's say, a phrase comes up or a word comes up and the other has an interesting anecdote or an expansion on the original thought. To me, that is what is so fascinating and allows the exploration of thinking and thoughts to be in real time. It's in that way it's very interesting, and it's what I'm liking, because there are not many instances where you can allow yourself to completely open up and allow pauses in conversation and allow a thought to be taken into another realm. Because in one way, there are no rules here. And the absence of rules gives ground for play, gives ground for the playing of thoughts, which I don't think happens in very much anymore.
So freedom and risk and vulnerability equals magic, equals doors opening, equals a conversation that we thought we were going to talk about an orgasm for the skin, the strange science behind aesthetic chills when you get goosebumps. We haven't quite got to that. So in this conversation, I'm not a biblical person, but we all grew up around the Bible in some manner or another, differently. But whenever two or more gather in His name or in my name, I forget. I don't know what the exact quote is, but I've experienced when people come together around really high quality conversation, that it simply extends and expands. And especially when you're talking about what I would call the frequency of God, which is what we're talking about, is how do you learn how to let go? How do you learn how to move out of resistance? How do you move into allowing? How do you transcend the world that we came from and find the world that the forest can tell you all about, but the humans can't, because the humans have kind of a rigid idea. And we're learning how to transcend what has been the status quo for so very long. And I think the idea of putting our attention in a real high quality subject matter, let's say. In other words, first off, our conversations are open-ended, but it's all about, how does happenstance work? How does synchronicity work? How does harmony and how does order work? How do we mesh with that? How do we become part of that? How do we enhance that? How do we ride along with it? And the fun part is, and you and I in particular, we seem to be able to add on to each other's statements, and we can stay in this direction uninterrupted. And I think there was a time we were doing calls with other people, and there were some really wild tangents. While always interesting, it wasn't really producing the frequency that I wanted to play at, because I want to be able to play all out. And that's what you and I get to do. And we record it, and I expect at some point there'll be people who will be interested in what we're doing and come be on the last part of the call where they can contribute and participate. But I think playing all out is kind of a wild deal, and I suspect it takes risk and vulnerability, and I think there's, I think it's worth documenting what we learn and certainly enjoying ourselves.
Yeah. There's one thought that's coming to mind that I'd like to mention perhaps before we close off for this particular session. Something that made quite an impression on me, and yet it needs constant reminding and constant reassurance, is the fact that, and I've read in many areas, thought thinkers, religious philosophers, many who have said the human being is someone or is an individual that is actually spiritual. We are spiritual beings. We just happen to be in a body. And I think listening to that and finally going, oh, for heaven's sakes, the outer shell of who I am is not as important as what I am internally. And that thought has been a great, not only a great comfort, but a great sense of discovery to me, that I am intended, my first principle, my first characteristic is as a spiritual being. My second characteristic is that I happen to be in a body, that my body, my frame is containing my spirit. I think that if people considered that, Jim, they would realize how incredibly amazing, powerful, and wonderful they really are.
One of the things that I like to suggest is that when we inhabit a body, first off, we're not our body, we're not our mind, and we're not our brain either. The body is actually technology that we inhabit to be in this realm, this existence, which is a variation on exactly what you said. And what I like to point out is that the body, first off, isn't ours. We assume it's ours, but it's not. But my point is the body, the physical body, is the end result of the bloodline lineage of that whole lineage. And so when we inhabit a body, there's a lot of DNA memory. There's a lot of stuff that comes from your mother and their mother before that and before that. And we actually kind of inhabit, as a spiritual entity, we inhabit a body that has a lot of stuff going on that ain't necessarily ours. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have to contend with it or deal with it. It's not that you get to ignore it, but it's funny that what's going on in the body is not us. And of course, our job is to move back to that neutrality and frankly bring the body with it. But in other words, make peace with ourself or the experience we're having.
Yeah. I think in terms of, if one does think of oneself as a spiritual being, then the capability and ability to see or to understand or appreciate a context that is so much bigger than oneself, is that just much more easier to comprehend. If you limit yourself as just being here I am on earth and I'm going to die and I'll be buried. There's a great gap between that and what is everything else. However, if one does think of oneself as spiritual and having a soul, having an alignment with the universe, then the context of being in the universe is more understandable. So much more understandable.
Well, if you look at your surroundings, everything is plugged into the universe. How in the world could a tree or there's so much order around us, and to think that it's all just there. And I like to say everything is a subset of God. Everything is a means by which God expresses through. Everything in the mineral kingdom, plant kingdom, animal kingdom, somehow the humans are out of sync with that. But as Abraham would say, we come in clear. I don't believe, I've kind of outgrown the concept of past lives myself, but we assimilate the material of the body we're in, and the DNA and the memories. And I think maybe it's in that contrast that it helps us learn how to what? Discover vulnerability. Because we're in this, let's say we come into the dimension as a spiritual entity. We come in neutral, no marks against us, no nothing. But we inhabit a body that's got a lot of scars, a lot of idiosyncrasies. And while it started out very young, the DNA from the mother and the dad influenced the body. And maybe it's this combination of coming in pure and neutralizing the body frankly, by loving it. You know, I've said the only way out is love. And so I got this physical body, and we've got our idiosyncrasies, and we, first off, we don't resist them, we allow them. And there's a whole world that opens up that somebody would say, well, you can't just allow things, but you can. I burned my 2 fingers Sunday before last. Burned them really badly. And as soon as it happened, I went for 3 or 4 seconds on, oh, this is bad. I had cut my finger a couple of weeks ago. It took 2 weeks for the cut to heal. This is much worse. It's 2 of my fingers. Not what am I going to do? But I just went on in my head. It happened very fast. And then I changed my mind. And when I changed my mind, I reimagined what I experienced when I burned my fingers. And what I reimagined was I allowed the experience, instead of, see, it's in resisting the experience that it turned into a burn. It's hard to understand that allowing it, but in allowing it, it dissipated, and all I have are some marks where my fingerprints have been melted off from the burn, but there's no burn, no blisters, no nothing. And so what I'm trying to say is the physical body isn't us. We're bigger than it. As we learn how to manage it, things start to turn out differently.
Yeah. There's another aspect to that whole thing called sacred contracts. That may be something we could examine next week.
If we don't get to the orgasm for the skin?
Yeah.
Just real quick, there was an article in fact, it's on my blog. It's the latest. You go to coreresonance.com, and it's in the blogs. It's called An Orgasm for the Skin, the Strange Science Behind Aesthetic Chills. And what we're talking about is where goosebumps come from. Or what else do they call them? Goosebumps, and what else they call them? Chicken flesh, is that a term? It sounds horrible.
But I don't know that term. I just know the goosebumps.
Well, like I started an article this morning, just as I went to start it, the hair stood up on my arm really for just a second. And what the article is kind of saying is it kind of has a biological thing, and maybe it has something to do with, standing up and then laying down and collecting heat or holding in heat. I said, no, it's part of your nervous system. As you have resonance with a certain kind of experience, you have a certain knowing, and the hair stands up on your arms. It's kind of like your nervous system through your hair is extending out and receiving more. But that's what orgasm for the skin is about, goose flesh or goosebumps or whatever you want to call it. And so we'll have to figure out what next week brings, though, huh?
Yeah. Or we'll maybe continue this conversation just completed and see what else comes to the surface.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, always a pleasure.
You're going to have a wonderful week?
Absolutely. Always do.
Yes. I've got film festival, Illuminate Film Festival for 3 days, and in Sedona.
Nice.
Third year they're doing that. It's the Illuminate. So it's a conscious film festival. It's really starting to take hold, and some big media people and film producers are starting to get involved in it because they're discovering that it's very real. So it's a front of consciousness is starting to show up in the film media now. It's a big deal. So I go up there to support it, physically support it, and contribute and volunteer, participate.
Well, certainly, I hope to hear of your experiences next week. Sounds like a plan, right?
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Enjoy.
Thank
Okay,
you.
good night. Yeah, bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.